and welcome back. So we are now going to talk about images. So what makes an image impactful? A good image is one that works together with the writing or the audio to add to the meaning of what you're trying to say. An impactful image can't be replaced by audio or by text. But it's improved by those things being included. So in this video, we're going to go over some good examples of images and how to use images in the bigger context of your course. So some ways that you might use images in course creation. You might do that with branding. So keeping your images consistent with your branding is important. But it's also important to not go overboard. Remind folks that this is your course, but do it more subtly. Explaining a concept. This is one of my favorite ways to use images, but it's also one that's most complicated in making it accessible. And we'll talk about accessibility of images in another lesson. You can also use them as a way to engage your learner. So you can create images for learners to fill in for their own purposes, for an activity, or to keep their attention in a video. And we're going to go over some examples of what makes a good image for each of these three purposes. So for branding, a branding image should be used consistently. It should provide a good visual marker, but shouldn't take away from the content. So you already know that for branding, you should pick a few main colors and stick with them. And you should continue to do that with your branding images throughout the course. For example, you can see here that the same color was used in multiple different places. And you can also see that the logo is consistent throughout, but does not overtake, what is trying to be said here. The second thing is explaining a concept. So, concept images are really priceless in that they're explaining things that are abstract. For example, Venn diagrams are pretty popular for showing, the places and things that overlap. So in this sample here, what you see is three different ideas that have an overlapping concept in the middle. And this is a good way to sort of explain something that's abstract. The third way is providing engagement. So I am doing this through this video. I'm using visual representation every time I throw lists or more complex ideas at you. I'm doing this in the workbook. For example, you'll see that there's a checklist in the workbooks. Having things like a graphic organizer where you're using a visual image to organize information, but providing that as your engagement activity. So you'll want to identify where you might need images. In the workbook, you'll find a section with questions to guide you in choosing places for your images, places that you need images. So what makes a good image? So in this sample, you can see that the colors go well together, that there's a different sort of image or icon for each one of these steps that they're listing out, and they match what they're doing, right? So step one, they have a magnifying glass because it's a visual identification that they're choosing a topic and figuring things out. Step two is organizing, and so there's a light bulb and gears because a lot of that happens in your head when you're doing the writing process. The third has images of pens and pencils and notepaper because you're writing. And finally, the last one is reviewing and revising. And so binoculars where you're trying to, look for the things that need to be fixed. And a green check mark because you've checked all the boxes, you've done all the things that you need to do. So you can see how the images have been selected to work with the text and the concepts that they're trying to explain. I would call this overall this is an infographic, so it's a good example of what an infographic should do, but also it's a good example of how to use visual elements to enhance what you're trying to say and give visual markers for the information that you're trying to share. So I also wanted to give an example of sort of a really bad use of, visual images. I think that this one is, I don't want to say it's self-explanatory, but you can see how, they're using colors, but none of the colors flow well together. There's no thread for the fonts, for the colors, for how they're using images. It's not clear why these images are even there. And on an infographic stance, there's way too much information in here, but that's a whole other video. But as far as visuals go, they're not doing a very good job of, threading the images, of making them work with the text and there's no audio, but making them work with the text in a way that aids understanding, right? This looks really confusing. So take some time to go through the workbook that will help you decide sort of where you need images so you don't end up like that, like that infographic, because you don't want them just thrown in unnecessarily. You want them to work with what you've got. And in the next video, we're going to cover, finding freeware and, making the best of the programs that you have access to in order to create images.